Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. Well, I guess it's not exactly a review, it's really more just some thoughts I've had about Star Trek Discovery. And like a lot of people, I went into this with a little bit of trepidation. I've never made it a secret that I wasn't super thrilled with the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. And while they certainly did have their moments, in a nutshell, they basically felt like sci-fi action movies, very, very run-of-the-mill sci-fi action movies that just kind of had a Star Trek veneer thrown on them because the Star Trek name is extraordinarily marketable. But with Star Trek Discovery, this I think kind of feels like what I've been wanting, really. Now, uh, in general, I was a little so-so on the first two episodes, but we just kind of have to think of those as pilot episodes, and pilots are always a little shaky. I mean, it's sort of standard operating procedure for any TV show to need three, four, maybe five episodes to really work out the kinks and kind of find its feet and really kind of get running. Now, granted, on shows where they have a much shorter run than the average 22 or so, particularly like Netflix shows where the writers and stuff have a lot more time to sort of really think things out and are telling a much shorter story, and then by necessity kind of have to pace things out a little bit more compactly and put little bit more thought into these things, it generally tends to go over better. But that said, there's just no getting around. It does take a little while for a show to work out the kinks and find its feet. And then starting with the third episode, that's where the show I think really started to take off for me. And then the fourth and the fifth, and I've literally just finished watching episode five. I mean, here I was like, yeah, this is kind of what I've been looking for. Now, there are criticisms, of course, to be leveled with the show. One of my friends I was talking with on Facebook, who I know to be quite the big Star Trek fan, and just for the record, I am a big Star Trek fan. I've liked Star Trek since I was like 12 years old. Pretty sure there's like, well, okay, I haven't seen all of the original series episodes, but I've seen all the movies. I've seen like the animated series from the 70s, all of Next Gen, all of DS9, all of Voyager, all of Enterprise, all the J.J. Abrams movies. I mean, basically, if it's Star Trek, I've almost certainly seen it again, except leaving apart the most of the original series. I've seen some of it though, and this really does feel like what I've been waiting for. It doesn't really exactly feel like old Star Trek, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But to kind of get back to what I was saying a minute ago, like my friend was sort of commenting on some of the continuity issues, like the holographic communications technology, like we see here as sort of standard, was introduced as a new technology on Deep Space Nine, according to him. And I think that does sort of jive with my own memory. It's been a really long time since I watched Deep Space Nine. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's on Netflix. I really should sit down and kind of do a hit the highlights review of rewatch of Deep Space Nine, because it was. I mean, once it really found its feet, Deep Space Nine was great. Um, in my book, it's always been the best written of the Star Trek shows. But Next Gen, because that's the show that brought me into Star Trek, will always be my favorite. I mean, like Data was like the first character in the Star Trek universe that I really, really um, fell in love with. I mean, Data to this day is still my favorite Star Trek character. I love Data; he's great. Um, but kind of getting back to things, that point my friend made. Well, Star Trek canon has always been a little bit fuzzy. Um, you know, uh, there's a, like for example, where somebody like rattled off in one Next Gen episode like the processing power that Data had in his brain, which at the time, and I think this was one of the early seasons of like the late 80s, early 90s, the computing power was pretty astronomical. Well, that's technology that was actually, we achieved that level of technology like 10 years ago. So little details like that, I think, just by necessity, you kind of have to let them slide because Star Trek is always meant to sort of reflect a future based on the now. And it's not as if these sort of weird funkiness things going on with technology haven't existed. I remember I was watching a review by Chuck over at SF Debris, where he was reviewing the Next Gen episode where they go on this Borg ship and they're poking around, and Riker is verbally describing what he sees, and Chuck points out, like, oh, hey, they've got these communicators with which people have repeatedly likened to cell phones. Oh, if only there was some way that they could, send the captain back video of what they were seeing rather than just leaving it to the officers to verbally describe what's happening. And if you think about modern technology, well, especially cell phones, well, yes, of course, there's no way they wouldn't have a camera in some way, shape, or form over there, be feeding a video back to the Enterprise. Not having that technology makes no sense. So this is, sure, if you're really strict about the continuity, then yeah, that's a mistake. But, some things you just kind of have to let go. Like another thing you mentioned was the look of the Klingons. Well, of course, the look of the Klingons has changed over the years. We all know that. And I'm okay with this because this is what Klingons would probably look like if they were created today. And I don't really think that, we need to be that slavishly devoted to a look that was cooked up in the 80s. Like the early 80s, too. I mean, granted, I think they tweaked it and refined it a little bit over time. But what was it, like Star Trek 3? Were they Star Trek 2? No, yes, Star Trek 2 or 3. 2, Wrath of Khan, where we kind of got to see the updated version of the Klingons. And one of the all-time funniest moments in Star Trek was that episode of Deep Space Nine where Bashir and O'Brien get a look at sort of like the 60s version of the Klingons, where they go back in time to the Trial of Tribbles episode, and they just look at Worf with this like WTF look on their face, and he goes like, "It is not something we discuss," or something like that. And then one of the worst episodes of Enterprise was where they actually came up with an explanation as to why the look of the Klingons had changed, and pretty much everybody said, this explanation is stupid, it's better that they left it. So here, again, I don't think we can just really say, I mean, okay, let me try this again. Adherence to continuity merely for the sake of adherence to continuity is not a wise storytelling choice. A comic book writer, I believe it was Kurt Busiek, said, like, okay, if there's like some little throwaway line that somebody said in a comic book, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, in an issue of something that in like 1973 that contradicts something that you want to tell in a story today, well then go ahead and have that contradiction be here, because you can't have that level of slavish devotion to continuity. Continuity in comic books, in TV, in movies, in anything, is ultimately meant to be a tool to enhance storytelling. And if continuity gets in the way, then you kind of have to either adjust it or in some cases just throw it out the window. I mean, if it's a little tiny detail that is ultimately not important, then chuck the damn thing. Now, granted, if it's like, oh, hey, Mike died in episode 2 and suddenly Mike walks through the door, well, yes, you're going to need some sort of an explanation there. But again, well, why is Mike suddenly alive? Well, okay, here you're using continuity as a tool. You have to come up with some sort of explanation as to why Mike is alive. And that can be done well or can be done incredibly poorly, and we've all seen both. But again, at the end of the day, continuity is a tool. And I'm okay with people having a little of basically kind of using it that way. Use it to enhance things, but don't be slavishly devout to it. And I think that so far Discovery has done that. There's a lot of, like just this episode 5, we've seen little nods to characters like Christopher Pike and Jonathan Archer. The uniforms that the characters wear are rather reminiscent of the ones that are worn by Enterprise. A lot of people have been thinking that, hey, maybe there's some Section 31 stuff going on, which, if I remember right, was like even mentioned, I believe, in Star Trek Into Darkness. And Section 31 was a very intriguing element introduced into the universe in Deep Space Nine. So again, this is using continuity as a tool and not using continuity for the sake of continuity. I think it's really impossible not to love what they're doing with the makeup. That's beautifully done. And like I said, visually, the show looks like what Star Trek made today should look like. You're taking those elements from the past, the inspirations, but you're using it to create things that are coming out of the world of 2017, the world in which we live now. And making something retro or something from the past just for the sake of continuity, or just because, this is something from the past that we're bringing back, that doesn't really serve storytelling. I mean, a lot of the things, particularly from the original series, seem absolutely ridiculous today. And yet, we do sort of have those little nods where you hear that sort of bunk sound that you would hear in the background of the original series. It occasionally pops up on the bridge. In the modern times, in Discovery, we have a couple of crewmen who are apparently cyborgs. Well, we don't really see that in the original series. But just the way technology is today, it makes sense that in a sci-fi future like Star Trek, that there would be people who were cyborgs. So again, I really love that this is taking the things that were good about Star Trek and filtering it through our modern world of view of technology and storytelling, because that's exactly what the show has to do. It can't be a show that exists in the past. It has to be a show that exists in the now and reflects modern sensibilities. The idea that some people have about entertainment, that it should be timeless, is in my mind an absurdity, because any show, any book, any TV show, any movie, anything created is always going to be a reflection of its time. Now, granted, you can write things in such a way so that it isn't hopelessly dated. You don't want that. I mean, have you ever tried watching an episode of Family Guy from like the first season that came out back around 2000? Well, Britney Spears jokes in 2017 aren't as funny as they were back then. That makes the episode seem dated and thus that not so funny. That's how to do stuff wrong. But just like good sarcasm, good writing, good timing of comedy, that's timeless. But kind of getting more into more specifics. I really do like what's going on with all the characters. I mean, everybody in the show genuinely seems interesting. There are a lot of really great actors, like Doug Jones is really good. I think he's a very underrated guy. Jason Isaacs. I mean, holy crap, we've got Jason Isaacs on the show. And of so many other people on the show. Michelle Yeoh in the first two episodes. How cool was that? I mean, especially since she was actually in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 several months ago. I mean, granted, a small role, but still. She's a veteran actress with a really nice resume, particularly in the action sequence. So having her in Star Trek, I mean, that's, in my book, is great. And of course, we've got our main character of Michael Burnham. I mean, people are really freaking out over this, and I don't really get it. I mean, seriously, like, one of the best Star Trek series ever had the lead character be a black guy, and yet we're all freaking the hell out. Like, some people are freaking the hell out because the main character this time around is a black woman. I mean, well, yeah, I mean, this show is really reflecting the world in which we live today, and not always in a positive way. But, I mean, I think it's been quite bluntly said by more than a few people that if you're the sort of person that has a problem with that you have completely missed the spirit and the idea of everything that Star Trek is meant to be about. And the reason I love Star Trek is that it is one of the few series that presents a science fiction future, a science fiction universe that I would actually want to live in. It's not a perfect world, But the great thing about Star Trek is that it is a world where humanity, for the most part, has put aside its petty BS, has gotten its act together, and we're out there trying to do good in the universe. We've created, in Star Trek, we've created a world where rationality and learning and discovery and peaceful dialogue are the virtues that we champion, the things that we hold in the highest regard. What do we hold in the highest regard in modern times? How many people follow you on Twitter? You know, like what's like who has like the #1 album? How many points a sports team played? How much money we have in a bank account? These are, at the end of the day, okay, let's not deny how much money you have in your bank account. Well, that kind of affects how you have to live your life. But ultimately, we spend so much of our time focused on triviality, stuff that, when we're all dead in 100 years, nobody's going to care about. Nobody's going to care who won a basketball game. Nobody's going to care what celebrity did or said something stupid. Nobody's going to care about really the clothes you wear or how many people you had follow you on Twitter. I mean, our priorities are, in a lot of ways, really terrible sometimes. I mean, granted, we're all flawed human beings, and sometimes we put our priorities in a really poor order. But pursuing knowledge, trying to resolve things in a peaceful way, and going out into the universe to learn more, because that's what we do. Human beings are explorers, we're discoverers, we're inventors, we're scholars. When we do these things, when that is what we put our focus, our energy of our lives and our culture into, that's when we are at our best as beings, as humans. That is what we do. That is when we are at our best. And a world where that is the primary drive of humanity, in my book, is, as I've said, why I love Star Trek so much. I mean, granted, we've seen on all shows, in the movies, that there are many times when the people in Starfleet and the people in the Star Trek universe, even though they espouse these ideas and these ideals, they fail to live up to them, that they fall flat on their faces, that they fall backwards into humanity's lesser instincts and vices. But that's inevitable. I mean, humans aren't perfect, and we never will be. But as the saying goes, humanity, and I might not be saying this exactly right, but humanity often stumbles, but more often than not, we make great strides. And forget boldly go. If you want a tagline that in my book sums up Star Trek, that's it. And so with the show, we have an imperfect series, but one that in my book is really good. And while not perfect, it does speak to the best aspects of Star Trek, while being contemporary, being something that, while it's a little too early to say, I think will hold up pretty well over time, and is enjoyable to watch. Also points to Discovery and for making the fact that the F word exists in the Star Trek universe canon. I don't know why I was so horribly amused by that, but I was. Okay guys, I think I've rambled enough, so I'm going to leave it off here. As always, please comment, rate, subscribe, and of course you can join me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Oh, and I guess I should add that on this channel, I'm going to be making some adjustments to our review docket now that the fall TV season has kicked off. I'm still figuring a few things out, But I think this is a time to officially announce that I will be adding from this episode, from here forward, Star Trek Discovery to our review docket. Now, if you're not familiar with my channel, if you're new here, currently we have basically the CW superhero shows: Arrow, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl. Those are all getting reviewed. I'm going to do every episode this season, and I'm super pumped about all of them. There's another show that I am going to be adding to the review docket very shortly. Again, I'm going to probably need to sit down and make a few small decisions here and there, but for the most part, I've got our review docket for the next couple of months figured out. I'm going to make a review video, I'm sorry, a channel update video, the first one in like 4 months, probably on Wednesday. So until then, guys, take care and have a good one.